Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the April 4th, 2022 special City Council meeting for the City of Troy. I will call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call from Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Abraham?
Here.
Councilmember Brooks?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Here.
We have one absence this evening, physical absence. I'll move that Troy City Council hereby excuses the absence of Councilmember Rebecca Chamberlain-Krienga at the special City Council meeting of April 4th, 2022 due to being out of the county.
Support.
Moved by the chair, supported by Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, that we excuse the absence of Councilmember Chamberlain-Krienga for being out of the county. Any discussion? Vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Motion carries. Councilmember Chamberlain-Krienga will be participating electronically this evening, and so we won't be taking any votes this evening, so that won't come into effect, but she is part of the discussion. Next on the agenda is public comment. I don't see that anybody has signed up for public comment this evening, so we'll move on to D, business stated in the special meeting notice. We have one item this evening. D1 is a presentation of the proposed fiscal year 2022 to 2023 budget, which is available for review in full at troymi.gov/proposed budget. And I will, actually before I turn it over to City Manager Mark Miller, I just want to remind council here who's present and Rebecca who's on the screen. Normally we do this in our council boardroom, which although it's a formal proceeding, it's a little more, it's a little easier to talk and have a good conversation. Let's do our best to try to emulate that here this evening, even though we're at the formal table. But you'll see me turning back and forth a lot, I think. So, anyway, all right. I'll turn it over to Mark, who has presented us with this good budget, and we'll let you get started, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. And also, IT, can you get the presentation up? With that, I'll just make an introduction. Well, was this the first time in 2 years or more that like all of council and all of staff are in one place? I want to thank staff for being here and their hard work on putting this together. And so we have prepared a presentation which is similar to the previous 2 years that we've presented to council. It's changed a little bit. We do not necessarily anticipate needing Wednesday meeting, but it is scheduled in there if we do need it and council feels that we should have it. So we'll make a presentation and it will be in conjunction with myself, Rob, and Bob, and then we'll take a break if you so desire. It's a good break time for questions after our presentation. So next slide, please. So our agenda for this evening is to talk about the budget in general and brief, trends and summaries. We'll talk about the general fund, special revenue funds, debt service fund, capital projects fund, enterprise funds, internal service funds, and then at the end we'll have questions and answers. The one thing I really want to note that we're in weird times, strange times right now, that we're awash with federal and state dollars. And we're going to really have to be nimble with this because there's actually a new round of requests happening, like with Representative Haley Stevens. So, you know, we will submit for projects and we can always amend the budget going in the future because we don't know what we have. But we have Kyle. I know, raise your hand, Kyle. Kyle is a relatively new employee. He's been working with submitting these, lack of a better term, grant requests to both our state and federal partners. Because technically, a lot of them aren't really grants. They're actually legislated, and which is a very unique animal because we really haven't dealt with that type of situation in many, many years. Next slide. So a little bit want to talk about our strengths. Of course, our most important strength we always talk about is our AAA bond rating. Also, we have only obligated 3% of our legal maximum of debt. So we have actually very little debt. And that's really true when you compare us to a lot of other municipalities, very little. Our tax base grew 4.34%, which in recent history is a lot. It's exceeding inflation by 3.3%. Now our weaknesses are the Aquatic Center has a structural deficit, so does the Capital Fund in general, and also Sanctuary Lake Golf Course Fund has a structural deficit. And those two items, they borrow money from the general fund for their operations. So at some point in the future, we're not proposing it right now, we might have to write off that debt as bad debt and have it go away. We'll see, because I think, in true honesty, I don't think the Aquatic Center really has a chance to cover its costs, not really. Where once we pay off all of the debt on the golf course, the possibility of actually having to pay for itself is definitely possible, because our one golf course does pay for itself currently. Next slide. What are our challenges? The threats are, like always, Headley Amendment and Proposition A. You know, it just limits our growth of our revenues, and even though we're in a higher inflationary time right now, our revenues are not going to increase dramatically. Just it will always be a slow, stable growth. You know, and we're seeing inflation as a threat too. That's going up above 5%. It drives people crazy like Kurt, because he never knows, or Bill, on are our estimates good or bad. In some ways we really don't know, and it makes it difficult at times. Another threat is that the EMS agreement will be coming due at the end of this year, and we've been having some challenges delivering EMS services. Now, I'm not an expert in EMS, and Chuck is in the back, and I know in the coming forward we'll have discussions, because there's all different levels of EMS and emergency services, and there are things like insurance payments which dictate how much money they can charge, and they're having difficulties, like a lot of industries, in finding people to work. And so that's something, and we're estimating it's going to cost more money than it has in the past. So currently that's $588,000 a year, and that's going to go up, but we don't know how much. What are our opportunities? I'd say it's all the federal fundings out there. We have $8.2 million in SLRF funds, which is a component of the ARPA. It's a component of ARPA. We're getting $1.5 million in community project funding that Congresswoman Haley Stevens had set up for us, and she has announced another round, and we're going to be submitting proposals for that this week, actually. And then there's a 9.7% increase in revenue sharing, and this is primarily due because the census came out. And unlike many communities in Michigan, we raised our population only slightly, but most other communities were not increasing populations like us. Next slide, please. So what are our budget priorities? They're to preserve public health, safety, and welfare, maintain our core services and infrastructure, maintain the community center and our other recreational facilities, enhance the city's communication and community engagement capabilities, and you will see that we have some positions in this budget to help us do that, both in the HR department and in the manager's office. And finally, we want to augment the city's our employee attraction and engagement and retention capabilities. And we also will have an employee in HR that will work on that to try to figure out what our employees want and see if we can find what those needs are and help supply and meet those needs. Next slide, please. All right. What are our numbers? So our revenues have increased over 12%, from 145 million to 163 million. And this is primarily due to one-time federal funding. Our total tax revenues increased just over 4%. 54.81 million to 57.19 million. And that's primarily due to stable but increasing taxable value increases and our inflationary multiplier, which is a good thing, but I think in the end, if inflation keeps going, we're not ever going to really be able to keep up with inflation. Next slide, please. So what's happening with other types of revenues? Charges for services have gone up 3.52%. That's 52.18 million to 54.01 million. And grants, including state shared revenue, have increased 67.81%, which is a lot. This, like I said, this year with COVID, coming out of COVID, it's an anomaly in how much state and federal dollars are out there. And that's going to cause us some other work. monitoring of those things, and we're going to have to pay for what are called a single audit. And we normally don't have a single audit every year. We're somewhat familiar with it. And what a single audit is an audit that's specific to federal dollars that we are receiving and expending. And what are the limits, Rob, when we have to employ one?
$750,000.
$750,000. So we don't normally do this every year, only when we have a larger federal project. Also, we have increased charges for services, just 3.52%. And then we have the state revenue sharing, which has increased 67.81%, which is a lot. Next slide, please. So this is the pie chart which we normally provide. And if we look at all of our revenues, the largest two areas are at 35 and 3% for taxes and charges for services, which is really typical that happens in our revenues from year to year. And from there, the numbers start falling. Grants at 15%, state shared revenue 6%, other 5%, interest and rents 4%, license and permits 2%. So as what we see is that taxes and charges for services is where most of our revenues come from. Next slide, please. When we start looking at our total expenditures, and this is before we do transfers out, we see an increase of just over 6%, $176.2 million to $186.93 million. The capital outlay expenditures are increasing 10.61%, and personal service expenditures 4.8%. Next slide, please. And this is a pie chart which we always do, which demonstrates what our expenditures are. And this is typical. Personal services is the one of the largest or the largest arena at 35%. And then other service charges are 33%. Capital outlay 27%. And then supplies and debt are like 4 and 1%. Next slide, please. So this next slide talks about new positions which are in the budget. But the thing is, they're not all new per se. Some of them are a combination of part-time employees so the position becomes full-time. We're getting the experience that many times consolidating part-time employees into one full-time position is much more effective. The position's stable, so we've kind of done that. And also, and I'll note when I go through the list that some of these have direct revenues that correlate with it. And what I'll go to is in the building department, we're proposing 5 new positions for insourcing of enforcing the Michigan Building Code. And obviously there is substantial amount of revenues from building permit fees to pay for that. The police department has 5 new positions for operational needs. And correct me if I'm wrong, 2 of those are specifically funded by Somerset Collection. They're asking for an increase of presence at that mall. Library has 3 employees for additional services. Obviously, that is not coming from the general fund, that's from the library fund. Human Resources has 2 new positions for increased operations. The manager's office has 1 new community engagement position. The planning department will have a new position that is related to insourcing of the enforcement of the building codes. And then the recreation department has 1 new position for operational needs. Next slide, and now I'm going to turn this over to Bob, and he'll take over.
Thanks, Mark. Go ahead, next slide. So in trends and summaries, we're going to look at city tax rates that are the cities alone, and then all the rates that the taxpayers pay. So this first slide shows our city millage rates, and you can think of this as kind of a layer cake with the operating millage as the light blue at the bottom, and that's been steady over the years. The capital millage is the orange band above there, and that's the part of the city's millage rate that's been rolled back by Headley. And then the refuse millage has also been pretty stable over this period of time. And then you can see where the library millage increased from about $0.5 mil to nearly 1.1 mil last year at the same time that the debt was paid off, and that was a debt millage that voters approved in 1999 that was paid off in the last fiscal year. Next slide. Again, this is the total, all the rates that the taxpayers pay. So those last millages are all in the light blue band on the bottom here. Above that, we have the Troy School District, which is mostly flat, fluctuated a little bit in the last couple years. And you've got the state education tax, Oakland County, which includes things like the Zoo Authority and the Arts Authority, a few other things. And then Oakland Community College and SMART, the regional transportation tax. So again, more or less flat. And this slide uses an abbreviation, which if you own a home, you probably know what PRE stands for. That's Principal Residence Exemption. So this is the rate that homeowners pay on their primary residence. If you have a second home or a commercial or industrial or other kind of property, then there is an additional state education tax that those taxpayers pay. But for most of the residents, this is the relevant millage. And although we do have 7 school districts in Troy, the Troy School District is the largest one, so we use that one for illustrative purposes here. Next slide. So this is what the average taxable value has been doing over the last 10 years. You can see the blue line, which is unadjusted for inflation, and the orange line, which turns those 2014 dollars into 2023 dollars or 2022 dollars. And again, pretty stable over that period of time. Next slide. And now we have the product of the city's tax rate and that taxable value. And so this shows you the average tax bill, the city portion of the tax bill, again with our operating capital, refuse, library, and debt millage, and how that's gone up slightly over the last 10 years. Next slide. And this takes that same layer, all those layers together, and adjusts them for inflation. So if you take those 2014 dollars and convert them to 2022 dollars, you get that orange line there. So you can see pretty stable total city tax. And again, this is for principal residents. Next slide. Here we've got the total tax rate. And next slide. Oops. And then this is the inflation adjusted, the total principal residence tax. So again, pretty steady over that 10-year period. And then I think next is Rob to talk about the general fund.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. So the general fund, which is our biggest fund, is up 5.7% this year, and $2 million in tax revenue increase, $800,000 in state shared revenue, and $640,000 in license and permits. You've seen something similar already to with all funds, but this in the general fund, we have 3 main categories: taxes, state shared revenue, and charges for services, which equal approximately 90% of our revenues. The taxes, again, with the inflation factor of 3.3%, that was the biggest since 2009. And in talking to our city assessor, Kelly Tim, there was other uncappings that occurred during the year and new properties added. So that's why our tax revenue is up a little bit more than just that 3.3%. State shared revenues are second biggest, and it's really more interesting because it's tied directly to the economy. And so the first thing I wanted to mention, in this fiscal year, the current one that we're in right now, because of the census, the state went back to October of 2020 all the way through February of 2022. And that gave the city of Troy an additional $700,000. It's actually $699,000. So $700,000 because of the 2020 census. Great news for us. It was like, manna from heaven coming down. So then one of the things I wanted to mention, though, was consumer spending is still 20% greater than when the pandemic first hit. And I was listening to Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, and in his annual letter, he talked about that the consumer still, right now, is in really great shape. So I believe that the numbers that the state has given us will hold up. I conservatively always knock down like $200,000 to $300,000 just to be conservative in the estimate that's in those numbers. But there's other things going on, right? Several of you are in the automotive industry like Edna and David, and I know GM sales are down 20%, Ford's down over 20%. So there's still concern with the supply chain, and so that's why I tend to be a little conservative with what we use. The third category, charges for services, recreation still lags the pre-pandemic levels that we had. And talking to Brian Gould, if you do go to the recreation center, it's still not, the activity is still not there. And also some of the things that are revenue producers, different programs, he can't always fund with personnel. So between those two things, revenues are still short of pre-pandemic levels. Good thing, though, as Mark had mentioned earlier, some of that's offset by additional revenue for Somerset fees that we get for police protection. Expenditures, total expenditures and other financing sources are up 6.5%. If you exclude the transfers, it's right in line with our revenue increases, so I feel really comfortable with that. Personal cost is up $2.2 million, contractual $600,000, and then also the transfer into the capital fund is up $1 million. If you look at it by budgetary center, again, I talk about this at audit time all the time. I'm really proud of our organization that we prioritize public safety between police, fire, and building inspections, and so that's over around 60% of our spend. Really impressive. Then when you look at our expenditures by category, personal services, we are a people organization, so we're in good shape because we have all of our union contracts through 2023, so that's why we're able to contain our personnel costs. But knowing that most of America right now, their raises aren't keeping up with inflation, that is a risk that we're going to have in future budgets as we go to negotiate contracts going forward. Okay, this is a new slide that we put together. If you concentrate on fiscal year 2021 in the top blue line, that's our unassigned fund balance. And if you see the growth from 20 to 21, that's primarily because the pandemic, we actually had a good fiscal year, if you'll recall, and it was primarily due to the CARES Act, all that additional money. It was approximately $4.5 million that we got from the state and the feds for pandemic-related items. The orange line, the non-spendables, where I really want to focus in on, and we're going to be talking about this in future slides as well. That non-spendable part of our fund balance is really the two advances that we've given to the Aquatic Center at $700,000 and then also to Sanctuary Lake at $7.1 million. Like Mark had said, I'm not sure the Aquatic Center is ever going to be able to pay us, the general fund, back for this, but we do think that we have a plan for the golf course in the future. Now, the golf course is going to continue to borrow money from the general fund through 2028. Done some projected cash flows, and as of today, I have it recorded at about $500,000 a year that Sanctuary Lake still needs to borrow from the general fund each year. So this is my third budget with everybody here, and that I just really want to start emphasizing this because this is just something that, as you keep seeing, if you go back from 2014 over to 2021, it grew from almost $5 million up to $10 million. So that is a risk to our organization. If we break down into further expenditures, you look at the general fund, general government, our expenditures are up 16%. And in finance, I'm responsible for a lot of that. $400,000, we increased the allowance for tax refunds for commercial, and also some bad debt receivables that we are analyzing right now on our books right now. So that was a big portion of that increase. We've also increased 3 FTEs. Mark's mentioned them already, 2 in HR, 1 in the manager's office. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is we do have an upcoming election in November 2022. And so we have several extra $100,000s in there for the clerk's office in this year. Public safety, believe it or not, rather flat. And you're going to ask, well, why is that? So the good news that you'll see later in the slide is our legacy costs for retiree health care continues to go down. And so when we do have new employees, the older employees were tagged with this retiree health care. So when they retire, there's less cost going forward with these employees. So that's why we're holding our own with the public safety costs, because we did increase 5 additional police positions in this budget. Public Works, just a reminder, the value is a little bit smaller than you're used to seeing, because this is the second year now that we've pulled Public Works out of the general fund. And that was a state directive to us to put that in to the major, for Act 51 dollars for the major and local streets. And if you'll remember that all the way back to the 2021 actuals. And we had an increase in this for our transportation department. Community development, which is planning and engineering. We have 1 new position for planning, and Mark already had mentioned that as well. And then we also had just normal 3% increase in engineering expenses for the year. Recreation and culture, our main increases in our parks. We have some maintenance contracts up, so we increased the budget for those. We also have more people working in the parks at a higher rate because of finding trouble getting employees to work. And that's offset. The community center actually is less than the prior year, and it's just because we have less going on right now at that facility. Transfers out. We decided to increase $1 million to $2 million into the capital fund. We'll get to capital in a second, but capital, as you'll see, is, at least as far back as I could go, an all-time high for Troy at $34 million this year. So that's why we moved another additional $1 million to help pay for that increase. And this is a slide that you have seen before and very, very proud of. Our legacy costs. Both David and Teresa have been on the board since I've been on the board, and they know about these numbers quite well. But the volunteer fire department is funded just short of 60%. The ARC, which is the annual contribution, is $1.7 million. Our liability is $10.9 million. For retiree health care, that's $2.7 million. And I actually have those numbers I wanted to share with you. 4 budgets ago in 2019, the ARC for retiree health care was at $5.6 million. 2 years after that, it went down to 3.2, and now it's down to $2.7 million. And that's because our funding level has gone up so great. And you can see there the funding level is at about 94%. And then the pension is the good news story. We're over 140% funded, 0 contribution, 0 liability. So that helps keep our costs down because our forefathers did such a good job with these things. I'm going to pass it on to Bob for special revenue.
Thanks, Rob. Next slide. So our special revenue funds include major streets, local things, local streets, things outside the general fund. We get Act 51 money from the state, from the gas tax for major and local streets. So revenues in major street fund this year is increasing 8%. Expenditures are increasing a little more than 11%. We'll talk about how that money is going to get spent when we get to the capital fund. Next slide, please. The local street fund is a smaller fund and smaller increases here, 3.7% on the revenue side and 3.47% on the expenditure side. And again, we'll talk about these projects in the capital fund. Next slide. Refuse and recycling, very modest increases here. Revenues 7.8%, expenditures 4.15%, and this is the dedicated refuse millage that's been pretty steady over the last 10 years. As you can imagine, with costs for labor and gasoline going up, we might expect some increases here. The good news is that it's a dedicated revenue source for that, so it doesn't affect the city's general fund or any other funds. The bad news is there's potential cost increases ahead for taxpayers. Next slide. Library fund. You'll all recall that our library fund revenue was increased by voters a couple years ago, and so that revenue increase of 4.64%, you're going to see that 4 point increase repeated everywhere you see property tax income, because that's our tax base growth. So nothing too interesting there happening on the revenue side, but on the expenditure side, we've got that big youth area renovation scheduled for this upcoming fiscal year. So that's going to push expenditures up more than 23% from the last year. Next slide, please. Oh, now I get to give it back to Rob for debt capital.
Thank you. So debt service fund, as you're, okay, so there's a typo in there. I apologize for that. We have $600,000 approximately for our debt service in 2023. The point we wanted to bring out was the last time that something was approved for a debt millage was in 1999. If you guys can all remember back that far, what you were doing back in 1999. It was paid off back in 2021, and it was for three purposes. One was for streets, primarily Big Beaver, the public safety facility, which is our police headquarters, and then some community center and recreational facilities. What's left that's paid through the debt service fund today is our DDA bond, which everyone on this council approved the refinancing in 2021. And the debt is, as of June of 2022, will be $10.1 million and won't be paid off until 2034. And if you recall, we lowered that by $3.3 million with additional payment of principal back when we refinanced it. Now, moving on to capital, I wanted to mention that, you've heard us say several times back at the advance, et cetera, that our needs are always greater than what we have, and we'll display that a little bit later in the chart. But we wanted to just I'd reiterate what Mark had said, that we have a lot of revenue this year, primarily because of the increase in federal funding, which is one-time funding. Our transfers in have increased. General fund, went from 1 to 2 million. And we keep giving this capital fund the brunt of the Headley rollback, because if you recall, this fund and the general fund, the two millages combined, we've been keeping the general fund at 6.5 mils, and so this fund keeps getting hit a little bit harder each year. So at some point, we're going to have to adjust that moving forward. So the revenues that we talked about, grants, have $13.8 million, and ARPA's 8.2 of it. The community project funding's 1.5, and then one thing you haven't heard yet is we have $4 million in grants coming in for Rochester Road construction. And so Bill Hootery's been working hard in securing those funds, and there's an 80% match for on the federal side of this. Expenditures, you can see where we're going to spend our money. Again, streets, over 13 million, parks, almost 8 million, recreation, 4 million, fire department, 3. You've seen that number before, because those are actually repeat from last year. These are items you've already approved for 2 ladder trucks, and so you're already used to seeing those dollars there. The library, they're at $2.8 million. The biggest portion of that's the $1.9 million for the youth renovation center. Police has body cams in there at $1.3 million. This is the slide that we just wanted to say, if you look at 2022 budget, that's where we stand. We're over $7 million. This is just an if. If we gave every department head all the dollars that they wanted from our facilities assessment study, we would bankrupt this fund. Of course, we won't do that, but this was just for more illustrative purposes, just to give you guys an idea of the needs that are out there. So, Mark already mentioned this, and this was also in his letter to us in the budget book, is that we have what is going to go into from the federal government. Well, we're going to replace lost public sector revenue. That's the path that we decided to go on. And again, here's the things that we're going to spend it on. $1.4 million for a fire ladder truck number 2. $2.3 million on industrial roads, which would include Beach Road, Northfield Parkway, and Oliver on the south end. And then $4.5 million for the pavilion, which will be a foundation for future Civic Center growth and activity. That 4.5 is also supplemented by another 1.5 million from the community project funding that we got through Haley Stevens. So this is a breakdown of this a little bit further. So streets, again, the 13.7 that you saw earlier, 9.3 will go to major roads, and the main spending there is for Rochester Road at just a little over $5 million. It's going to partly offset by the $2.3 million from the federal funds. Parks, the 4.5 and 1.5 is revenue in to help pay for the $6 million Stein Community Park. And there's also going to be Sylvan Glen Lake Park and about $600,000 for playground structures at various parks. Recreation, we have $4 million that's going to be spent primarily $2.5 million on the roof at the community center, $700,000 for HVAC, $400,000 for a boiler and pump replacement, and $200,000 on exterior repairs. The fire department, like I already had mentioned, approximately $2.9 million apparatus, which includes 2 fire trucks that you've already approved. The capital projects fund for the library, $2.2 million for building and improvements, and then another $600,000 in materials. Police department, $1.3 million again. The communications there is primarily the body cams. So one thing that Mark, Bob, and I, and the rest of the staff have talked a lot about is that this is different now, and we need flexibility. As Mark had mentioned, we are continuing to go after any type of federal funds that are out there as possible, state funds. We still believe the county. We've deferred Stevenson Highway into the 2024 budget. We're going to start the work in 23, but primarily in 24. We hope to secure funds for that from either the feds or the county. And so there's a lot of activity out there, and so we just ask for your flexibility as we continue to navigate through this. I'll pass on now to Bob for the enterprise funds.
Thanks, Rob. Next slide. So the first enterprise fund, and enterprise funds, there are business type funds where the activities generate the revenue to pay for the services. In the case of Sanctuary Lake, we've budgeted for modest revenue increases of nearly 3%, and expenditure increases a little bit more than 6%. But as Rob mentioned earlier, the primary issue here with this fund is the debt payment. And so every year there's a debt payment of about $500,000 that this fund can't cover itself, so it's getting advances from the general fund. So in this coming budget year, it's going to go from 7.1 to 7.6. Year after that, be another $500,000, another $500,000 for about 5 more years until these debt payments are ended in the fiscal year 2027 and 28. Then everything continues to go well. Sanctuary Lake can start paying back not only the general fund, but it also owes Sylvan Glen Golf Course Fund a little bit of money too. So next slide. This is a slide you've seen before. It shows the relationship between the advances from other funds that Sanctuary Lake Golf Fund has received and its unrestricted net assets. So with this particular fund, we see it's, pretty steady at that $500,000 a year because the golf course is able to cover its operational costs for the most part. It's just that debt payment that it's not covering here. So hopefully, eventually, when we get past those debt payments in 5 years, we can bring these two lines, start bringing these two lines back together, and eventually bring the fund into balance. Next slide. Sylvan Glen, this, we were just talking about this. Sylvan Glen can generate $15,000 in a month during the winter if there's enough decent weather for golfers to get out there. So not much happening here. You're seeing both revenues and expenditures increase modestly, about 3%. Next slide. The Aquatic Center Fund, revenues decreasing a little more than 6%, expenditures going up a little bit more than 12%, and the debt to the general fund in the coming year is estimated to increase by about $500,000. Next slide. So this is a much different story than the Sanctuary Lake Golf Course Fund, obviously. The Aquatic Center, because it's doesn't have that steady debt payment. This is all operational costs. If the weather's bad and we have a bad year, it's had to borrow money from the general fund. But most recently, in the last fiscal year, there was some major capital improvements that were funded, which is why you see the gray line spiking up as much as it did, and then the orange line going down. So to be clear, in this coming year, in this budget that's being proposed, City Council isn't being asked to make any decisions about the Aquatic Center specifically. We've already made some capital investments and continue to make those investments to keep it open for now. But at some point in the not too distant future, we'll have to make some decisions about whether this is going to continue to be an enterprise fund, or if it becomes part of the general fund, or potentially part of some new revenue source in the future. Next slide. Enterprise fund, the water and sewer funds are actually two funds, but everybody experiences them as one fund. We've got, and again, this is a completely self-supporting activity. Water and sewer rates pay for the water and sewer services. There's no tax dollars involved here. So we've got revenues increasing about 3.7%, expenditures increasing about 2%. But what it means for the average resident is that the combined water and sewer rate is going to increase 3.9%, and the average residential quarterly bill will be $293.87. Next slide. And now back to Mark to wrap it up with the internal service funds.
Thanks, Bob. So internal service funds are funds where they're not supported for charges for services. It's more or less to provide services to city departments. And we'll go through each of these. The first one is the building operations. And what building operations is that each department gets a charge for the space that they take in their building. And then that includes custodian fees. It could also include heating, cooling, things of that nature, insurance. And so our revenues are increasing 5.77%, $1.51 million to $1.6 million. And expenditures are going up 2.48%, $1.56 million to $1.6 million. And then there's the information technology internal service fund, which obviously you're using right now on your computer. That's an example of it. And there's a fee that the IT department charges all the other departments based upon how many personal computers that you have. So the revenues are proposed to increase 7.58%. That's 2.3 million to 2.47 million. And expenditures decrease 6.13%. That's 2.46 million to 2.3 million. And then we have the fleet, and that's cars and trucks, most of them, not everyone, but most. The revenues are going to decrease approximately 0.5%. That's 5.2 million to 5.17 million, and the expenditures increase just about 12% from 8.9 million to 9.9 million. So this is a point where we're starting to conclude our official presentation. This is where you can have any questions or answers. But I would like to just talk a little bit about that. We've had some discussions, whether that be at the advance or my individual discussions with council members, about the need to potentially find additional revenues for the city to meet our capital needs and maybe build out new parks that we have that are undeveloped. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to work and look at what funding options, additional funding options are out there for a city in our case, and we will bring back to council recommendations, the positive and negative points of each of those funding options moving into the summer months. And I really anticipate this to be a lot like when we went for the library millage, in that we will conduct focus groups. We'll also do a resident survey trying to identify what the residents would like funded with these new potential revenue sources. Bob and Rob, did I miss anything that we want to bring up before we conclude? So where we're at right now is we can take questions. You can take a break if you so desire, I suppose. But also you need to decide if you want to keep the Wednesday meeting. And obviously, if you have additional questions, we have a couple weeks before we actually approve the budget. So if there are very specific questions, we can spend some time on those. So we'll turn the meeting over to council.
All right, thanks, Mark. That's a good, so first, obvious, we're not approving anything tonight. Those watching at home, I'm sure there's several of you. This is a study session. We're here to talk about these issues. We will have a public hearing at our May 9th meeting is the expectation, where opportunity to have the public, of course, come forward for that, where we'll hopefully approve a budget, most likely this one, if not something very similar to this. I'm not inclined to take a break right now. Is anybody? Okay, I'm good with that. Because we're typically, I'm going to say it, it's going to sound negative, I don't like this in this room. It doesn't feel right. I just want to get that on the record. It's not comfortable for some reason, and it'd be better sitting around a table. I'll say it again. But I think we'll do what we normally would do in that room, and we'll go through each one of us with an opportunity to ask questions. Recognizing you just gave us 62 slides, we might fumble around if we reference some previous page numbers. I hope you can help us get there if we need to for any charts.
Mayor, just really quick, I think that's important to note that you have time.
Right.
We have plenty of time if you do have questions.
Right.
We're in no real rush. We have until, was it May 9th, did you say?
Right.
Okay.
And there's you don't need any specific consensus from us this evening on any specific item.
Unless you want to change.
Unless we want to make any changes. And there's a lot of wonderful city employees out here this evening who I'm sure are happy to answer any questions that we may have if.
That's why they're here, Mayor.
That's why they're here. All right, just making sure. Be prepared, everybody. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to start with Councilmember Brooks, if that's okay, and work down the table this way.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, thank you very much for putting together this presentation. It was very thorough, and it was very, very good. One quick question that I had was, I know that our priority as far as the budget goes, one of them is, enhance our communication and community engagement. And we had talked about hiring a full-time person to take care of this. Is that, I didn't see that. Did I overlook that?
Yes, we have proposed 2 positions in the budget. One, a position for employee engagement in HR, and then in the manager's office, someone who would be in charge of community engagement and DEI, and then kind of take control of all of those community relations staff Bob, can you expand a little bit about it? Because it's sort of going to be under you.
This is following along with what we talked about at the retreat, and then we subsequently sent council a memo about the budget priorities coming out of that retreat. And so those positions are both included.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Teresa?
Not right now.
Not right
It was very thorough, so I'll continue to
Okay.
think. If anything comes up, I'll
All right,
interject.
Councilmember Abraham?
Thanks, Mayor. So I know we're not specifically talking about other potential revenue streams or sources. That's not what tonight's focus needs to be. A decision doesn't need to be made imminently. And I would apply that comment also for what we want to do with the debts that we know are not ever going to get paid off in anyone's natural lifetime. The question I have is understanding in some of those cases, we'll want to engage the community. We don't have that person hired in yet, I don't think. What is the time frame of when we would need to start making decisions? Is it at next year's budget, next April, or is it before then? Do we have a general idea of when we need to start thinking through things? Because certainly, the Aquatic Center, even in the fall of 2020, we're having tough conversations of, do we continue to put capital into it for repairs? And so, while I do not believe any of us have kicked the can down the road, the can's going to stop, I think, in the near future, and just trying to get a gauge of when that's going to be.
Okay, I'll start off, and then Rob, you can help fill in any areas that I need help. I think the two situations are rather different. The golf course, once the debt is paid off, it will appear to generate enough funds to pay for itself day to day and potentially start paying off both the other golf course and the city. And when's that debt paid off?
2028.
So it's a little ways down the road. Now, the Aquatic Center is a little different. It requires a lot of funds to fix up and to keep going, and it's getting older. Also, it's so weather dependent in that if you have a cool year, it really does affect it, and it's only open 3 months. So that decision is not right here, right now, but what will start happening is, as we keep going a year down the road, how much money are we going to really want to spend towards that facility? And is that the right facility for the community? So I think we'll eventually have to start thinking about, do we want to put the money into that facility? If so, then we'll make that decision. And where will we get the revenues for that? Or do we want to replace that facility with something what the community wants today? And I don't even want to say what that is. Rob, anything else you want to add to that?
That's fair.
Okay. So I don't think there's an immediate decision that will need to be made even in the next year or so, but understand that that facility, the Aquatic Center, is going to need capital dollars to keep it going.
There's, I think, another way to look at the question, and that is, prospectively or retrospectively. So if one approach is just to pick an election day, say, we want to have a ballot proposal for voter control.
Don't say anything, Bob. Don't even, just leave it as a blank.
And then work backwards from there, which I don't recommend. What we're proposing to do is hire the staff, do the community engagement, and figure out where that takes us and when it takes us there. And then, at some future point, if there's a question to be put on the ballot, then, there's a timetable to do that. But I think that's the way we're looking at that right now, rather than trying to, pick a date and work towards that. Does that answer your question?
It does. I just don't like putting good money into something that may not have like I said, a natural life. Should we choose to do upgrades in one way, shape, or form. Right now, it's just kind of eating money. And so I'm just looking to do that, not do that as soon as possible. I think we all are.
Mayor, I think Rob will have a comment about this, and I think I know what he's going to say. Go ahead, Rob.
Right. So I will say this, when we were deliberating, we were talking to Dennis and Brian about the cost that we have to put into this facility. We did, so to speak, minimize what we put into this current budget, hoping to get another year down the road, so to speak. But you're right. The following year, if you look at the numbers, we're asking for a lot of additional capital. Dennis will tell you it's just a matter of time right before that pipe breaks or whatever the case may be. So I guess my point is there's a little bit of time there, but I feel like there is a sense of urgency.
Appreciate that, and that's why I was honing in on it, because you can see it's a pretty steep upgrade or
Right.
uptick.
Councilmember Brooks?
Just to kind of interject on that as well. Now, there is a lot of federal money kind of coming in for various projects, and so that's kind of a thought that maybe if we could have an idea of what we would maybe want, and, you know, that potentially we could capture some of those dollars for, you know, building a new facility or whatever we decide we want to do. So I don't know. So kind of what Councilmember Abraham was saying, you know, the thought of kind of pushing it down, we may be losing out on federal dollars that are out there now. So that's, you know, just my thought about it.
Thank you. Councilmember Abraham, did you have more?
I'll hold off for now.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right. Councilmember Hoderick?
I'm actually like in the binder versus the slides on the general fund balance, the unassigned fund balance as a percentage of the budget. And looking out to 2025, it's 8.2%. Talk to me like I'm in kindergarten. We had a policy of 20 to 30%. So maybe it's all consistent with this conversation. There's alarm bells going off in my head with this 3-year outlook that, you know,
Right.
I got to think that trend further out is even worse.
So that's similar to all the previous 3-year budgets that you've seen. What happens is we're in deficit budgeting, so we budget for full employment. When we have like in the police right now, we have double-digit openings for police officers. We budget them at their total highest cost possible. So in other words, a lot of the people we'll hire are single men or women. When we budget them, we put them in family plan for health care. That's $23,000 versus $8,000. So we've budgeted about a $5 million loss. We'll probably come in year after year, we're a good $3 to $4 million short of that. So you won't see those losses that we've put out there. We have to budget for full employment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So yes, don't worry. So that budget priority that we have of making sure that we're between 20 and 30%, that's just for the current year that you're looking at. We made sure that we're between that 20, we're just below that 30% on purpose, 29 point something if I recall.
So that makes me feel a lot more comfortable.
Yes.
On the public safety side, the Somerset Mall, 2 additional officers, we have 2 there now, right? So they're looking to have 4 at Somerset Mall. Okay. And I did have one other. That, again, the timing, it sounds to me, to bridge on to Councilwoman Abraham's comments, we're feeling a sense of urgency, but we want to make sure it's engagement and resident-driven with us. We have our facts that the staff is bringing. What do the residents want? And did I hear timing of starting that process this summer?
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, that's the challenge. It takes time to get that engagement to help define what we want to do. And then we do need the nimbleness of the funds, whatever we can do to help you all be nimble, but to be engagement-driven, because if we try to get out ahead of our residents and we don't have a proper pulse, that won't be good either. So I'm wrapping my head around what the next 6-month challenge looks like. The public safety at 60%, I got to say, given our recent engagement, this budget reflects where our residents want to be in that regard, in my opinion. And I'm glad to see it. And I think that's it, Mayor.
Well, all right. Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Gall.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad you brought up the issue about the EMS, because that question actually came to me from a representative from another city, kind of asking what's going on with our EMS. You mentioned they were having some struggles, so I'm not going to ask a whole lot of questions or talk about it, but I'm glad to hear that we're on top of that and looking at that issue.
Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's actually two different issues,
Okay.
Councilwoman Erickson Galt. And yes, we are on it, but there's two different issues. One was the way that we were working with some of our neighbors and our joint responsibilities. And then the other one is the contract ending. And we know it's going to cost a lot more. And we also know that it's hard for that industry to find people to work, and which is in a lot of industries right now. So it's sort of twofold. We think we've solved the one portion, being when we're asking our neighbors to help. The bigger thing is when we put this out to bid and who's going to provide service for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. On the ARPA funds, it's my understanding that we have a fairly long period of time in which to spend those.
Rob is much better at that than I am.
Yeah. They have to be, Kyle, obligated 24 and... Thank you.
Okay.
Did you-
So,
Just in case anyone's watching, obligated by 2024 and spent by 2026.
Correct.
All right.
okay. So meaning that they have to be budgeted by 24
Correct.
and then spent, okay, gotcha, all right. The 1.5 million that we got courtesy of our friend Haley Stevens from the federal budget, I forget what the name of that grant was called, the community project funding.
Yep.
Is that earmarked for something specific, and are there timeframes in which we need to spend that money?
In this budget, we have allocated towards the expansion of Gene Stein Park.
I know that's what we allocated, but my question is more general. Are we committed to spending it for that? Was that part of the deal for when it was?
That was the request, yes.
Okay, all right, so it's, all right, that answers my question, okay. And is there a time frame for spending that?
No, there's not much rules out on that now. In fact, I've seen none. Yeah, no rules whatsoever yet.
So spend it before they come up with rules.
But just really quick, Congresswoman Stevens' office just announced another round of community projects funding.
Right.
And actually, they're due this week.
Very happy to hear that. And thank you, Congresswoman Stevens, for all your assistance in these challenging times. When will we be getting more specifics on the proposed work for the Stein Park? I'm a little uneasy about setting aside $6 million without really any kind of idea of what we're setting it aside for.
What I will say at this time is we have design work, and we have to hone it down to fit within our budget. That's where we're at.
Okay. And then if we were to set aside the $6 million, other than the 1.5 that's dedicated, that's coming from the federal government. So that's a definite, that's part of our, what we requested.
Correct.
Okay. The rest of it is theoretically optional, depending on what our plans are for the park, which are still remain to be seen. How much flexibility do we have if we decide, like a year or two from now, that maybe we need to hone that project back or expand it or
I think we just have lots of flexibility,
okay.
I would say. And we also have the potential to ask for some new dollars to help fund that project.
And in terms of, and I know we don't have a definite plan for what it's going for. There's been talk about a pavilion and ice skating rink. Is that still somewhat up in the air in terms of what exactly we're spending it for? Or is that part of, again, part of what our ask was to the federal government?
So nothing has been decided on what to spend on.
Okay,
We're working on some design development, and we can provide you a report. Why don't we do that?
that'd be great.
A report to follow up what we're thinking of doing and some of our other strategies to find additional funding for that project too.
Okay,
Can I
wonderful.
interrupt you for just a quick sec? Just clarification on that. And allocating funds in a budget aren't the same as voting on a contract to expend those funds, right?
Correct.
I mean, we have the flexibility with that always.
Right,
So
I
we're not,
understand.
yeah, just want to make sure that's clear.
I'm thinking of these in terms of these monies coming from ARPA or coming from the specific earmarked funds that Congresswoman Stevens got us. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around how much of it is a done deal in terms of where we're going with it, what our direction is, and how much of it is, this is what we're looking at doing, and we're going to nail down the actual specifics later on.
So what I would say to that specifically is this budget does include allocating the funds, and Rob, remind me in the exact dollars, 1.5 of community projects spending, and then
4.5.
4.5 million from the ARPA fund, which is the SL, I don't know that acronym yet.
ARPA.
Yeah, ARPA funds. So those, our budget actually has that in there, and so we're saying that's what we're going to expend those funds on. Doesn't mean we have to, but it's our budget plan, our budget policy to do that. And it might be wise, though, for us to see if we can find additional federal funds or state funds to add to that project.
Yes, I agree. And then, I think that was all of my questions for now. Just to clarify, if I was reading the charts correctly, both our city millage and our overall tax rate are pretty much stable. They're not, they're actually look like they might be going down slightly, but because of Headley and all that. but
So the
not-
way that we roll back our millage is we do not roll back the general fund millage, which is 6.5 mils, and we do roll back every year the capital millage, and I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Yeah, and part of what's different this year is that, you know, the debt millage is gone. The library millage, as you recall, was rolled back before it was ever levied. Voters approved 1.1 in November, and the following July was rolled back. And then the refuse is the same, and the capital portion is rolled back. So and there's a table in the front part of the budget that shows the actual numbers rather than the layer cake version.
Page 21, actually, and it shows it's highlighted the current year that we're deliberating on right now.
So a long time ago, as Headley and Prop A came in and we had to start rolling back city administration and then eventual budgets, the decision was made and carried through every single year to roll back the capital fund millage, not the general fund. So that's why that's happening.
Which, from my perspective, makes a lot of sense. You know, makes it a lot easier for budgeting purposes and to maintain that wonderful AAA bond rating. Bingo.
I ask a question right on this? Sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
The chart on page 21 goes back to 2017, 2018. Do you know what was the capital, if capital fund hadn't been rolled back by Headley all these years, what should it be? Do you know? Like, what was it to start?
1.6.
1.6? All right, and it's down to 1.22?
Based on the 2008.
2008. You have that memorized, Councilmember Hamilton? Okay.
Nerd. Yeah.
All right.
I don't have it memorized.
Rob, check him on that, will you, just in case? All right. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, thanks, this is all good. My point being that I think it's important for our community to know that part of why we're looking at spending these ARPA dollars and other grants on one-time projects such as Stein Park is because, hopefully we'll get some more federal money, hopefully we'll get some more relief, but we don't know what's going to happen, and we are still have that same millage rate going forward, So we get questions sometimes from the public where they're saying, well, why can't we use that to spend on our general fund and then reduce taxes or something like that? And I think it's important to understand that because of Headley and our charter amendment, that millage rate is locked in or decreasing.
Actually, with ARPA, there are strings attached to it that you can't you can't supplant to lower your taxes.
And again, another reason why.
An even better one, actually.
Even better one.
Well, and also to the GFOA, the Government Financial Officers Association, agrees with you. In fact, that's their recommendation, is you spend these on one-time capital expenditures.
Right, because it's a one-time deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
God willing. Yeah.
So, okay, I think that's all my questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Got a lot floating around, but I'll try to keep it reasonable. I've talked with a lot of residents. I know this wasn't brought up as part of the budget, but I kind of feel obligated to mention it. And as we talk about how we're allocating the ARPA funds, and we don't 100% know exactly what we'll be doing on the Gene Stein Park, we're just going to allocate it here, but we're not actually going to put the funding totally forward. But a lot of residents come to us wanting a cricket field, they want pickleball courts. I know from our surveys, we hear a lot about trails and pathways. I don't recall, looking through the budget, if there was usually there's typically the $750K allocation every year for trails and pathways. Is there that in the fiscal year 23? And then do we have any thoughts on where we are at with cricket and pickleball? I would just like to hear that. I know there's a lot of residents probably listening right now that want to hear that. Also, as we look at our 6-year capital plan, I know IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is on the table. There's a lot of money there. I'm wondering, I know we can't assume we'll get any of that, but I'm sure we will, how we kind of can apply that to our long-term planning. Then I know county and state are allocating their ARPA dollars as well, and I'm curious how we can tap into that. I know at our own funds we can spend on, because it's revenue replacement, we can spend on almost anything, so we can use other funds if we need to match something with county and state. And I know also the state just allocated the $4.7 billion budget amendment or whatever you call it. So I'm wondering, do we have any, and these don't have to be answered now, don't worry, but maybe just by when we approve the budget in a month. But just want to get it on the record, but what do we see and how is there any opportunity there for us to bring some of that in? And I don't know, I'm throwing a lot out
Take a breath for a second so we can get a couple. Actually, I would like to hear about trails and pathways tonight if we can, and cricket, maybe some pickleball if you can at least speak to that.
Sure.
Some of the bigger projects, the supplemental I know out of Lansing that just came, and there's some sound mitigation money that's coming out of that stuff.
Sure.
But the other questions, maybe you can wait. But I want to do some of those other ones tonight if we can.
Get those on the record.
Yeah, those are good.
Not something I need tonight, but the cricket and pickleball and trails and pathways, yeah. If you
Fair?
Kurt, do you want to talk about trails?
Well, I was
Like-
just-
Our first victim.
While he's going, so the thing about,
Hey, Mark, I was just going to say on Trails and Pathways, what we did do this year in talking to Kurt is we've had $750,000 placeholder, and when we were looking at all of our capital expenditures, we literally, well, if you see the proposal, it's $34 million, right? So things had to give and take. And so when in talking to Kurt, we said, hey, Kurt, what's the next project? He said, well, for this year, we don't have anything. So we took 750 and moved it back a year into the 2024 budget. So now there's 1.5 in the 2024 budget.
Okay.
So Kurt can speak more into detail from there. Go ahead.
We're not, yeah.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, Rob covered a lot of it. I just want to say that it's not necessarily don't we have anything going on. We do have stuff going on. It's just not going to be ready for construction next fiscal year. We've taken a lot of our concept and worked with community partners from future development to get easements to connect the Sylvan Glen to the Waddles Road, the dog park pathway through that 1 square mile. So that's in the works. We are coordinating with some development again in the Troy schools and moving some things around. The First Presbyterian just found out that Pastor Bob is over there, so that's a great resource to have. So he's gonna get me an audience over there to help connect some of the natural areas on their property as well. Hopefully connect. So as Rob indicated, it's not that we don't have anything going on. We're just right now we're finishing the JC, the phase 3, and it's going to take a little bit more time to do phase 4, if you will, and that's why we decided to allocate those funds in future years. Did you want me to touch on?
talk about the private development, how we're trying to work with private developers in general?
Yeah, so anytime a private developer comes and there's an opportunity to have easements or at least reserve easements for future projects, trail projects, we're really working hard. And Brent Savinant's a real good advocate for Trails and Pathways as well and brings those developments up and those different opportunities. So
I think you can talk a little bit about Jeanstein Park. We have some ideas that we want. We're just concerned that the project, we need to get the cost in line, but we want to have a place where people go to. We want a skating amenity. We want, you can talk a little bit about what you've done with OHM and just talk a little bit about it. It's fine.
Before I get into that, Mark, can I talk a little bit about the pickleball?
Sure. Go ahead.
So pickleball, cricket, we did put some preliminary cost in the budget. Again, things got prioritized. Some things got pushed out, which is one of the reasons why we postponed Sylvan Glen. We pulled the Sylvan Glen restroom and parking lot that was on the table for last council meeting, because we wanted to have this exact discussion on leisure services, on what is important, council's priorities matching up with administration's priorities, because we had a cricket at $500,000 field, and we have pickleball at $800,000, and then we have Sylvan Glen with a restroom and a parking lot, paved parking lot at $1.2 million. So making sure that all of our priorities are aligned and we're meeting the community's needs when it comes to leisure services. As far as the Gene Stein Community Park, some great exciting stuff, and just a little history on that. Someone asked about the old earmark, the community development grant program, and we were ready because we had the idea. We were working with the Troy Community Foundation, who wanted to raise some funds and do something bigger. And that idea was already implanted, and we already had some kind of discussion and placement. So we were able to grow that idea, and that was a project that we submitted, and we were successful. With that, it was at the time a $1.5 million idea. And sitting down and like anything, wow, wouldn't it be great if we, and we visited a lot of other communities that had ice skating rinks, had outdoor pavilions, larger pavilions, what we're trying to accomplish here, and recognizing that if this is going to become Troy's Central Park, and this is going to be, it's going to fulfill that desire to have the Civic Center keep real civic orientated, we're going to have something big and grand to have people come visit and want to come visit and be a real attraction. So because of that, it continued to grow, and why we're requesting the funds we're requesting. And of course, there's always room for expansion, not only just in our idea of the pavilion and ice skating, but also throughout the entire Civic Center to keep that real civic-minded, civic-orientated, community-type atmosphere, Central Park, if you will.
can I finish up on that subject, unless that's a question directly related?
It kind of
Okay.
is, yeah.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you. So just, we have this idea of building this facilities and the ice skating rink. Do we also factor in how much it may cost to maintain it, and the maintenance of these facilities that we are going to build?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done feasibility studies, so our consultant, as Mark mentioned, OHM, we engaged OHM to do this project, and they've done some feasibility studies. Throughout our investigation, we've talked to different, we talked to Dennis Bostic with the Troy Sports Center, making sure that we're not doing unnecessary competition for him. And we asked the question, would he be interested in running the operations, because we don't have much experience in running an ice skating rink. He said yes, that'd be something he'd be interested in. So there's opportunity that might not be an operational expense. We might be able to contract the actual operation of at least the wintertime ice skating out. And the idea with this facility is that it's not going to be like the Aquatic Center where it's a 3-month year facility. It's going to be a year-round facility. So wintertime ice skating, believe it or not, I never thought I'd say this, but roller skating and rollerblading is really coming back. And we can do outdoor roller skating and rollerblading, and that the ice rink track can be so many different things, and that's what we're designing it for.
Thank you.
Can I, just a quick follow-up, you mentioned maybe Dennis Bostic and the Troy Sports Center, that kind of thing. It's similar to what we do with the racket club, right? The tennis bubble, that we own those facilities, but we contract out the services and they
Exactly.
handle all that. Similar concept?
Very similar.
Okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Mark, is it okay if I?
Sure.
My assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, you backed up to, the Troy Community Foundation had been talking about wanting to do something, backing up even further. The ideas of this are coming out of the resident input that we've had over, probably 20 years now. Even most specifically, the most recent time that we talked about the Civic Center is my assumption.
Exactly. And even more specifically, the ice skating. The winter ice skating was a direct result of the last community engagement we did, that we saw that there was a demand for some sort of winter recreation in the city.
And I guess I just want to make the point that this isn't, a group of people that sat in Mark Miller's office and conjured up something to put there, that this is something going back to when I was first involved with the city, the Leadership Troy, when we talked about the Civic Center and dreams we had of, as a community, of what we would want there. So it's the potential for the realization of consistent ideas we've heard from residents over many numbers of years. I just want to make the point that this isn't just coming out of thin air. This is resident-driven, how they want our Civic Center to be used.
Sure. And if I could add to that, the most recent, maybe official committee was the Green Space Subcommittee out of the Parks and Recreation Board that specifically has a portion in their report, the narrative, that says the city should invest in civic use in the Civic Center in the near future.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sure, yeah. I'll go Mark and then Bob. This is fun. Yeah.
All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about, first of all, I don't want to be accused of being a curmudgeon, okay?
If you have to say that, Mark, then just as a heads up.
I love sport, okay? But the fact is that our official document, our policy, is a Parks and Recreation plan. And as an example, cricket is not noted as high in that document. So then that indicates to us that cricket isn't one. However, there's nothing more than I would love to have a cricket field that's funded and we can afford it, and there's people using it. That I would love that. But I think the point I'm trying to make, we're going to rely on Bob and him doing the surveys and doing the focus groups to find, do our residents want to pay for a cricket pitch or additional pickleball? That's part of, this is the art and science of finding out what people are willing to pay for and providing that and being up front. That's what I wanted to say. I have no idea what Bob is going to say.
Well, it dovetails quite nicely with that, Mark. In the last resident survey that we did, less than 12% of respondents supported funding things like cricket and pickleball. Many more people supported existing facilities like the Aquatic Center and the Community Center. So I think this community engagement, and it's not just going to be me, it's going to be a team of people who know as much or more about community engagement than I do, really engage with the whole community and make sure that, you know, these demands for things like cricket and pickleball aren't just squeaky wheels. I can tell you based on my conversations with our recreation director, Brian Gould, right now, the competition for court time is between basketball, which I don't think we ever hear about at council meetings, badminton, which I don't think we hear much about council meetings either, and pickleball. And right now, the demand at the community center is split between those three things. So I think really doing this systematic community engagement, which there was surveys and community engagement done as part of the Parks and Rec master plan. We did another survey last year, and we're going to do more community engagement and see where that takes us. So that whether it's new funding sources or existing funding sources, City Council is making decisions to spend resources consistent with what the whole community wants.
And I do want to add, we've talked about it before, obviously there's always the risk for undersampling certain populations in our community engagement, and it's vitally important that we do reach maybe the people who are answering the survey aren't the cricket players, right? And that's something we need to look at, both with the additional hiring of some of our community engagement in the city manager's office, and I know we'll continue to work with that. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I know we're well aware of that. We've talked about that several meetings, but I think that is an important factor too, and it shouldn't be, I love our resident surveys and I love the results we get, but I take some of them with a grain of salt, recognizing I still hear consistently, as I'm sure others do, they're underrepresenting potentially some respondents and residents. So always balancing act, right? Trying to figure it out, but appreciate that clarification.
I did
Dave.
have one more thing.
And hold 1 second. Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig, I haven't forgotten about you. You're coming up, but we're working through this.
Yep, we also had representatives from Troy Youth Assistance come, and they requested extra funding. Was that in here as well?
Mark.
I thought we answered that question, but the answer to the question is, given the unfilled positions in the police department, we can fund that request, and then in previous years and upcoming budgets, we'll call it out specifically in a line item.
Okay.
Because you're not approving the budget at line item levels, more at the division and department levels, and we have that ability to move it around. But what we'll say is in future years, we'll call it out at the higher level. But we're going to fund it this year, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, just kind of follow up to what you'd said, Mayor. You know, if there's no demand for cricket, it's because there's literally no place in Troy where you can play it. So it's hard to measure how much demand would be. You know, to bring up cliches from movies, but if you build it, they will come. I mean, I've heard from enough people in Troy that if we had a cricket field, it would be used, you know, all the time. And the only field that we have right now where you can even practice cricket, even though it's not set up for league play, you can't reserve it. And so it doesn't make sense for people to plan a cricket match if they can't reserve it. So the need is there for a place not only where you can have an official league size field, but also where you can, people can hope that, you know, if two teams show up ready to play, that there isn't already two teams already there playing. So that's, again, and I know that's a whole nother layer of challenge, the idea of, you know, because we've heard about this before, the challenges we have with reserving fields, so.
That, Mayor, and exclusivity, because there seems to be some groups that want the exclusive use of it, and we just can't do that.
Right. So it'd have to be something similar to like when my daughter played softball on a Troy recreation team, they had the use of a particular softball field at a certain time. So it would have to be set up like a league sort of situation like that, where the league is actually paying for the use of that field. So, but then again, you have to have the field first, so.
Mark, I heard Kurt say there was a $500,000 allocated or talked about, and then did that get deferred to future year, or did that get taken out completely?
The next year, 2024.
So as of right now, it's for the next fiscal year budget, there's a $500,000 allotted for a cricket field,
Right.
which is, okay, a year, 15 months from now, essentially, right? Is that right?
Wait, say that one more.
15 months from now, is that the next, that would be that, yeah,
2024.
okay. And do we have, well, I don't want to, we're not talking about that budget, but it is, so there is potential for it, but it's a year back.
And I very much appreciate that. You're not ignoring it, it's just, you're working through the process. This is a budgeting process, and I've had these conversations with residents too, that budgeting isn't kind of like everybody shows up, we want this, and it happens. It's a multi-year process, and so it has to get into the pipeline for it to happen.
Mayor, just a clarification, it is in the three-year budget.
It's in the 3-year budget.
It's in the three-year
Three-year
budget.
budget, yeah. So, excellent, thank you.
Is there a potential place for it if some of our state representatives were able to get funds from Lansing or something?
Yes.
Okay. You got that? All right, thank you.
Can you send us any info you have on the cricket field, like potential locations? I know we've heard stuff in the past, but it's been a while, so if we can get that.
And there's risk
Yeah, we
there's
can.
risk in that, right? I mean, but don't look.
Go ahead, if you need something to say, go ahead.
Yeah, I know we've put the reports together in the past that delineated what existing developed parks could support a field. So there's one logical that doesn't have a lot of displacement, and that's Raintree. Raintree Park has an existing ball field that would be eliminated, and that entire area, because it has a very large outfield that we don't play soccer in anymore, that entire area could support a full-size, game-size cricket field, and that would be the proposed location.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Mark. All right, Councilmember Chamberlain Crane, got questions? Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I want to just start by thanking City Management. I want to thank IT, who has made it possible for me to participate. Want to thank you, Mayor. Want to thank all my council colleagues for your understanding. As many know, I was in Romania and Ukraine for spring break, and unfortunately, we had a positive COVID case in our family, and so we're not able to leave Romania. So I'm in my mother-in-law's apartment. I'm really grateful to have a place to stay. So again, just thank you so much for everyone's understanding. I know it's not comfortable to have such a conversation in council chambers, but as I've always said, a budget is one of the most important things that we do, the discussion of a budget and the eventual approval of a budget. And so it's a conversation that I didn't want to miss. So I'm glad to be a part of it today. So I do have a number of questions. Some of them were answered in the process through that very thorough presentation. And again, I want to thank our CFO, Rob Melzik, and thank City Management for putting together, again, a very, very thorough budget and a presentation to highlight some of those items. So the first thing that was a question to me, and you answered it essentially, was, and a lot of these questions come out of me diving into the budget because I have a bit of time on my hands, so was able to spend a good amount of time with it. On page 2, it talks about this $2 million contribution from the general fund as priorities that our residents want to invest in. At first I thought, well, what is this? And then later on page 34 saw that this is referring to the transfer out from the general fund to pay for capital needs. And as CFO Melzik explained, that we have to do that all the time because there are so many great capital needs. And due to Headley really very much hitting the millage rate for the capital projects fund, and it happens all the time. So I kind of understand kind of where that's coming from. If I got that wrong, let me know. And it just, that really hit home the amount and great capital needs that we have, even with all the federal funds that have come in this year, that we still have to do this $2 million transfer from the general fund, just given all of those needs. When it comes to ARPA, I also had a question. So it was great to see how that's breaking out, and now I understand more. 4.5 of ARPA goes towards Gene Stein. We have the great 1.5 million coming from the Community Projects Fund, thanks to our Congresswoman. We're also funding the roads and the fire truck. Just to clarify, is the fire truck something we have already approved, or is that something that will be coming to us
Yes,
in
it's
the
already
next
been,
fiscal year?
it has been authorized for purchase by council. It's just that there's like a 14-month lead time that goes multiple fiscal years.
Got it, and that's part of like the revenue loss kind of replacement. And just a comment is, it's neat to see how we are allocating those ARPA funds. I know there were some questions about our community engagement in that process, and I think the way I look at it is we have been doing that. By having that great community survey that we put out last year, we heard from our residents, they want investment in parks. And so therefore we're putting the ARPA towards the Gene Stein Park, something that people can see. And we heard from residents that they want to be able to see, know where those dollars go. And so I think this is a great example of something very concrete, as well as public safety. That is always a priority for our residents. And so seeing that, a fire truck, that is part of our public safety. And we also know that roads are very important to our residents. So I'm happy to see where that money is going. In terms of public safety, I know that there were some, from Troy Fire, some needs around potentially human resource support with regulations and other things. And I know we didn't see anything in there. Just kind of wondering, was that determined that wasn't needed, or how did that work out? I know that was part of the advanced conversation.
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. I apologize.
I do. I think she's asking, Chief Rearster had asked at the advance about potential additional employees, full-time staff at the fire department level, and it doesn't seem to be addressed in this budget.
It is not in this budget. We're in the process of analyzing that and coming back with a proposal in future fiscal years, and which is going to probably need corresponding revenue for that.
Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for explaining that. That's exactly what I meant. In terms of the 1.2 million for police equipment, did I hear correctly that is for body cams? And if so, I know that was part of our budget last year, so trying to understand how is this part of the budget again for this year?
Go ahead, Rob.
Sure. So that's part of it was body cams, and there's going to be a recurring payment each year for the body cams.
Is that the sort of the technology side that goes into it?
Correct.
Got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. The other one, and this is what I'm most excited about, and I know my other colleagues were as well, is around with the new FTE, the new position with the Community Engagement Manager. And again, I have a lot of passion in this area around communications and community engagement. And I know that I keep asking this question, but just wanted to hear a little bit more from city management. You're thinking about how you see the communication PR component and the community engagement component. How do you see those work streams kind of coming together? And then related to that, diversity, equity, inclusion, because as we heard, sometimes we're finding our surveys are not always reaching the full breadth of who and the entirety of our population. So just wondering, how do those things come together in this role?
So what we're proposing is this new position would be a leader of all of the community engagement activities, which would include DEI. It would also would include social media, and they would then we would do some shifting internally, kind of remove some of the people that report to Bob to this new position, and that person would be globally in charge of all of those arenas.
Okay, and would that person potentially also play a role with Global Troy going forward?
Potentially, oh, definitely, yes. And we need a more stable representative with Global Troy.
Great, okay, thank you, that's helpful. Another question, kind of shifting topics, is around inflation. I know it came up, I know it was discussed, and we know inflation just continues to increase. And we've had a number of budget amendments, a lot of them just given the rise in various building costs and otherwise. Do we feel this budget has adequately taken into account what we, as best as we can, sort of expect in terms of inflation, in terms of when it comes to construction and other costs?
The quick answer is yes, but the other answer is we have no idea, to be honest. Sometimes we have consultants who might be trying, it's just really hard to estimate how the inflation will impact each individual circumstance because they're all different. And then throw in global supply chain issues, that adds to it. So we did as good as jobs we could to recognize what inflation will bring, but I want to be upfront that there's a lot of unknowns in that arena.
And that was the other question I was going to ask is around energy costs, because that is something we need gasoline for police cars and other things, and if how that maybe has been taken into account.
Kurt, do you have any? I don't really have an answer to address that. Kurt, could you relate to fleet?
Yeah, certainly. We do participate in cooperatives to purchase our fuel. So we buy it much larger quantity than what you would see. So we don't really see the drastic fluctuation that you would at the pump. But fortunately, our fleet division being a internal service fund, it does have a little bit of flexibility. It does have its own fund balance, so it can weather those ups and downs without really impacting the general fund.
Natural gas?
Natural gas is the same way. We purchase our natural gas through a cooperative, and we're currently under contract. So we know we're going to be good for at least another year in our natural gas. And then again, we look at the market. That's actually a pretty interesting way we purchase our natural gas, but we watch the market. We have about 30 days, and we buy when it's at its lowest point, and we usually do a 2 to 3 year contract off that cooperative as well.
You're on a run, you might as well talk about salt.
Okay, and salt, the price of salt is really indicative of the use of the previous year. So our price of salt next year is going to be really how we used it this year. This year was a pretty average year, so we don't see a huge cost in the actual salt. What we're probably going to see a increase in cost is the trucking to get the salt to us. That's the same with a lot of our aggregates and a lot of our service industries that are really dependent on fuel to get the product or deliver that product.
Thanks.
That's really interesting. I was just listening to energy analyses on Romanian TV, so that's why it was top of mind for me. Last two questions. So we know state share revenue has been better than expected, and partly that's due to our growth in our census results. When it comes to Act 51 revenue, and in light of calls to temporarily suspend Michigan gas tax, should we have any reason to be concerned?
Well, any cut of Act 51 would not be good for us because we use every single cent of that.
Okay, so we will see how that all kind of plays out, and I know MML has their opinions on it because of some of that. Last question, it kind of relates to what Dave the Councilmember Hamilton just raised around some of the nonprofits we have a relationship with. I was looking at Troy Historic Village. I know that it looks like for this fiscal year 2023, there is $131,000 around the general operating support proposed, which is a bit higher than the previous year. I couldn't find the Nature Center number in the budget, but just wondering, is that an increase? And the reason why I asked some of this is that, I know it's kind of late in the game, and it relates again to what Councilmember Hamilton said, but if there was any way, whether it's through ARPA funds, it'd be neat to see a way to be able to support some of those nonprofits who have a relationship with us as a city. And of course, and some of the idea came out of being at the MML CapCon conference, talking to other mayors. I know Rochester Hills, they did a great job at just taking some of their ARPA funds and supporting their nonprofits. So just wondering a little bit about the increase with the Troy Historic Village, and also kind of where I couldn't find the Stage Nature Center Gen Ops, where that number was, but I can follow up with you later on that.
why don't we take the opportunity to answer that in writing and come back to all of council? Give us some time to research it and be able to do it. Go ahead, Rob.
I can answer. So the Nature Center, there's additional facility work this year that's going to be done, so there's an increase from the prior year. The Historical Village is the same amount as prior year, and then there's additional dollars for a new master plan, so that's why there's an increase there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Rob. That's very, very helpful. So overall, thank you for a great budget. And I know that a budget is one of the greatest things also that staff have to put together. And Rob, well done to you and all your department heads and all of the department heads in the city and city management. So thank you very much. It's looking good.
Thank you, Councilmember
Now,
Chamberlain.
rest my case on questions.
All right. Very good. I was just listening to economic analyses on Romanian TV too. That's funny. No, I wasn't. But I have some comments and questions, but did anyone, some of you early people, you gave a quick couple and moved on. I just want to make sure. But I guess I'll pick up actually where Rebecca just left off before I go into some bigger, broader stuff. But I'm not sure, the Troy Community Coalition, TYA, they came and made a request. Maybe it's a police department issue, or Lori, I don't know if you're still on the board. The Port Coalition haven't had any events in a couple years now, and I'm just wondering, is it our standard practice to wait to see if they request funds from us, or is it worth maybe checking in with them to see if they need some support, if that's a police department function? I worry about Nancy and Marianne over there.
We'll reach out to the groups and see if they have additional requests. And we may be able to handle those requests in our existing budget without even amending the budget, because it's really not that much money.
No, I know it's a tiny percentage of what the overall dollars look like. For some reason, I think sometimes they, Carl was here. And they went through a period where if they even tried to ask, they were shut down pretty harshly, as I understand. And so I just want to make sure that, and they're not always looking at our calendar for when we're handling these things. So I want to make sure that they are aware we're doing all of this. A lot of my questions specifically have been asked, which is good. It means we're kind of all thinking in the same direction, which I appreciate. Sorry, my notes are, if you can see these, it's a mess, but no, that's what you get. A couple things. I mean, I'm very pleased to see this proposed budget from the standpoint of, we're coming out of a pandemic, hopefully, and our city looks good financially, right? I mean, there's obviously challenges ahead. There's been challenges ahead for the city for probably as long as it's been in existence. I mean, there's always something to worry about, to think about, and there's been some really rough times. So I'm very thankful to see the work that Mark and you all put into this to provide us with a clear presentation. Some of the charts, I'll be honest, they seem it's hard to, a lot of lines going a lot of different places. I understand where you're going with them, and we'll talk more about that. But I really do like to me, this is the year of the capital projects, it looks like. I mean, it's a huge investment in our capital needs here in the city. And from everything I know from, I think this is my 7th budget, and Ellen, I won't even say how many it is of yours, but 9th. But there's always more that needs to be spent on capital, as we're talking about. So I'm also grateful to hear that we'll begin the process of researching potential options of what we need. For me, and I don't know if this needs consensus or what, one of the things, I think it was 2019, we had the facilities assessment report binder given to us. I'd love, as part of that process, to have kind of an update of where we are with some of that. I know we probably would have had more focus on that had it not been for COVID. But it got pushed aside, and that, talking about at the advance, we talked a lot about City Hall and what it needs. I know there's some heavy investment in the community center as far as the roof and the HVAC. I know City Hall needs HVAC, among other things. It would be nice to have kind of an update to see where we are and where we look like, and I think this goes a little bit out where Edna was, what the most immediate priorities are going to need to be, and if those are manageable over the next couple of years, or if in the next couple of years we need big amounts to get to stay where we need to be, that would help a lot, I think. thankful to see some of the employee upgrades, I guess, or additions. You know, the slide early on that showed 18 full-time employee positions being added, I think that's deceiving, as you said, because it's a lot of merging of part-time. If possible, could we have like a summary breakdown of that? The idea of 18 full-time sounds like a huge expanse in our government, and I want to be clear on exactly what it is that we're budgeting for, just in case questions come up, because I think they probably will. And I know that's all broken down here in the big budget, but if it could be on a one sheet, I think that would help. The Aquatic Center, my question is, you know, what is going to be the process to make these decisions? I think for a year and a half, we've known that these were going to need to be, or this issue is going to need to be discussed and looked at. And we kind of started we talked a little bit about, should it stay in an enterprise fund? What's the process of not doing that? I guess I don't want it to look like that we've just kind of sat on that for all this time, because I know that there has to have been something thought about of that, and I want to make sure we're still thinking about it, and it's part of that overall facilities assessment for me, but I don't want to forget, not that we're going to forget about it, and you obviously brought it up tonight, but I want to make sure that that stays a focus, and again, if it's going to need, $1 million next year, and we're not talking about it this year because we have other things, I'd like to know that, because I do think the community deserves to know kind of also what's going on and what needs to be addressed. Which leads me to the whole community engagement aspect of everything. And we talked a little bit about this fiscal year doesn't go into effect until July 1st. Is it reasonable to potentially do a budget amendment and front load some of that hiring process to start earlier if necessary? My fear is if we don't hire someone until summer, we lose. Before we know it, it's the holidays, and we're not going to get any bang for our buck out of that person from a community engagement standpoint on some of these other issues. I don't know. Is that something that could be considered?
So I don't want to commit to anything, but we'll look into, see what we can do to accelerate, because I have the same concerns you have.
Okay, thank you. Also with HR, is Jeanette still here? I saw Jeanette somewhere.
No, she's
not here.
No.
She's not here. Well, sorry to say that. We know a big part and a big challenge with any employer right now is hiring people and retaining them as well. So I think it's a good thing that we are giving HR some additional support. I think that's a big part of something we can do to help attract and retain quality employees for our residents. And I'm very thankful for that. This is a broad question, which I'm sure I know the answer, but I want to make it clear. There's a lot of increases in expenditures this year. Certainly, you're comfortable those are sustainable. I mean, we're not doing anything that we wouldn't feel. I know you often talk about budgeting from a small c conservative standpoint, Rob. I just want to make sure that there's some big increases, it looks like. I just want to make sure we're in good shape from your perspective on that. We're not, and I know, Mark, from your standpoint, you've said many times you don't want to add an employee that you're not sure you can keep around. So I just want to make sure you're both very comfortable with that.
I would say the only thing that's not in this budget that we've already done is what you guys approved last month, which is for hiring for police, the additional holiday and the additional vacation and salary. That was done after our budget was already too far down the road. But again, the police usually returns around $2 million of unspent budget each year, so I don't have any problem with that.
It's very nice of you, Frank. Thank you, Rob. And Mark, I'm sure, you.
I agree, but the only thing I'll say is going into this new inflationary period is going to bring in unknowns.
Sure. For the whole world.
For the whole world.
So that's not just us, but couple of general comments. I am so thankful that you've worked hard to chase federal dollars and state dollars. Not sure what the county's doing with their $250 million. It'd be nice if they let us in a little bit on that. I will remind everybody we probably shouldn't count on any more federal dollars, especially as things, it's an election year in Washington this year too. Things could be tough. I'm very thankful for the $1.5 million that Congresswoman Stevens got for the pavilion. I also am really thankful for Mark and Kurt and everyone involved in having that proposal essentially shovel ready. I mean, it was something already in the works, so I know it made the Congresswoman's job very easy to include that as part of her request. So that, again, is something I know that our city staff does really well, having things ready to go. I know, Bill, you're frequently ready to go with roads projects to chase money whenever you can. So I appreciate all of that work. And I do appreciate Congresswoman Stevens for advocating on our behalf to get those funds. And I think it will be something that our community has long asked for, which relates so kind of to the Stein Community Park expansion and the ice rink. It seems, I can't believe it's been 5 years, but 5 years ago with the charter amendment and the Civic Center conversations, it's been very clear to me since that time how much our community wants a central type park, a place for recreation. They want our public land to stay public. They want it to be enhanced, and they want it to be something that they can use as a community in general. And I think this project, without having specifics obviously in front of us, and but the concept of it is exactly what they're looking for. And I think Councilwoman Chamberlain-Kranga said it, a lot of this comes from community engagement that we have done on this issue for 5 years. So I'm very thankful for that, and I think it's the right step for our community, and I do think it's something that our community will embrace, and that's something I think we can be proud of, and something that our community residents can be proud of, for sure. I also love hearing about looking for partnerships to help with any maintenance costs and operational costs. That's a big thing. I know there's a lot of talk about not spending ARPA funds on one-time projects that then need to be maintained, then you can't afford to maintain them. So I'm glad, of course, you're already 10 steps ahead of us on that, so we appreciate that. Sorry. It's like a beautiful mind up here.
Oh, Lord.
Trying to keep the informality of the boardroom at the council table. I'm doing the best I can. I think that's kind of it. I appreciate the trails aspect too. We've been a proponent of the trails and pathways for a long time. I also know that it's with limited resources, not just financially, but also from a personnel standpoint, you can't be doing new parks in 6 different places and trails, and there's a lot of work that goes into each of that. So I know that I'm grateful to see, the 750 is not in here this year, but it's, for now at least, proposed to be added on to next year. I don't want us to ever give up on that. I still think it consistently rates very high with our community survey responses, and we get great feedback from the trails that we have done. My one remaining question from the park standpoint, actually it's two, is Sylvan Glen. We took out the bathroom in the parking lot at the last meeting, and
We just delayed assigning the contract or reassessing it.
Right.
We pulled it back. We didn't take that out.
You took it off the table that
Yeah,
night,
okay,
is
we
what
took
I
it off
meant.
the table, okay.
I'm a little unclear. There's $600,000 allocated in here for play equipment. Are we still keeping the parking lot and the bathroom off the table for right now until so better question is delaying it till when, I guess, is the question.
The near future. It's not,
Okay.
we just wanted to make sure that we looked at it in the 100% view with the overall budget.
Okay.
That's why.
But is it included in the budget,
Yes.
this new one or the one we're currently in?
The new one.
The new one. Okay.
Yep, I carried over.
Okay, just making sure. I was a little unclear on that. And then the cricket we talked about. We've talked about cricket a lot. And pickleball. I still would love to talk to the school district about if there's any room to, I know they took away the middle school tennis courts, which created an issue with some of our residents who use those. I'd love to maybe have a broader conversation with them about whether or not they're looking to increase any of their recreational facilities in the future with any monies they get, and maybe we can work with them. That might help with some of that. I just wanted to put that out there, I guess, and the cricket's been talked about. So overall, like I said, the year of the capital projects, and I think that that's exactly where we should be. And we will continue to address all these upcoming needs and probably have some difficult questions and decisions to face over the coming months and year. I don't, for a minute, underestimate how much work goes into these budget presentations and this budget in general. And I know we meet up here twice a month and we give you a bunch of feedback whenever we can, but I know there's a lot of work that goes into even after months of talking about these and planning and having department heads and all of the work everybody does in every department, to then all of a sudden have this be ready for print and delivered to us. I know that's a big deal. So I thank you and thank all of you for continuing to lead with transparency and to give us the tools we need. And I hope that you feel, Mark, that we did some things a little bit differently this year with planning as far as the advance. I hope that has been beneficial from your standpoint of getting to this point. There's our strange form of government where we set the policy and then you have to figure out how to do it. I thank you for that. I hope it, like I said, I hope it's helped.
And interrupt for a second. You mentioned the advance, so I want council members to think about what they liked, what they didn't like about the advance. We're exploring other options, and we may come back to you with, and if you can believe it, if we're going to do it, we have to start working on it now. Right. So think about what you'd like, what you didn't like, what you would like to see, and we're looking at, potentially doing it again, but differently, and hopefully better. Bob, anything you want to say about it?
Yeah, well, I wanted to mention back in February, we sent council a report that was titled Fiscal Year 2022-2023 Budget Proposals, but it talked about the outcome of the last advance. And so, Mr. Mayor, you just mentioned the need to make decisions about the Aquatic Center and City Hall and some other things. And so in that report, we talked about the fact that we were going to propose 2 new positions in this budget, which we did, to deal with community engagement and employee engagement. 2 other things that don't require additions to the budget are having a team of staff, one to look at the Aquatic Center more closely and the other one to look at City Hall more closely and make more recommendations. So as we were going through the budget process, we talked to the city staff involved and basically asked, do we need any budget resources to do those things? And the answer was generally not, or maybe a little bit of consulting services or something like that for to study specific things. So while it's not highlighted in the budget document, it is on our to-do list, so to speak. And so as we kind of get into this new phase of having the advance and the outcome of that and reporting to council and how we're following up on that, you'll see more reports so that that it's not just kind of falling off the table and nobody's thinking about it anymore. It's very much top of mind.
Mayor, I have one more thing. I know in previous years we have prepared an infographic related to capital projects, and I'm assuming council members liked having that. We thought so. So Bob and I have been talking, and we want to redesign the way that we're doing it, and we haven't started working on it yet, but we're going to start working on it now, right, Bob? Yep.
Yeah, we need to present the budget first and make sure we know what's going into the budget that you're going to adopt before we spend too much time on that.
That makes sense.
Right.
All right. Additional comments or questions, Councilmember Hoderick?
You were mentioning about the 18 full-time employees, and that sounds like, a budget that's growing government. I hate to beat this drumbeat all the time, but we cut the staff to the bone after the downturn and have not come back. One of the things in this budget document, the binder that we have, the metrics of the deliverables that each of these departments bring to our community, that the work that gets accomplished is amazing. And this is a lean, mean, quality machine here in the City Hall that delivers a lot, but it can only do that for so long. That's only sustainable for so long. And so, I mean, in general, the specifics of the part-time employees and what they're doing is one thing, But I think it behooves all of us living in this community to understand what it is we demand of this staff, what they deliver, and know that those deliverables were impacted tremendously, and that kind of legacy is still there. And it affects our ability to attract and retain talent. So we want to be that staff that is amazing and lean and does things really well as stewards, but not so lean that it's too tough to do. So, you know, I'll be an advocate for the 18 all day long because I saw what we did. Also, I did have an asterisk on, you know, Rob, you had made the point on the state shared revenue that you're very conservative about that. Again, just imparting institutional knowledge, I basically like to assume that we'll never see it every year because it's a capricious dollar amount that we saw cut from us during that era. So, you know, amen on the being very conservative on that. I mentioned that out loud to council colleagues. It was devastating when that happened, and things can change so fast. And I think that, and I just wanted to highlight parks, pickleball, cricket, they're in this budget. Work goes on, analysis goes on, identification of where these things can go is happening. It's in this policy document that we're approving. I don't want there to be confusion for residents that are watching. But we are being as data-driven as we can be because those of us who've been around a long while, we know 50 people can show up and want us to take our policy document and zig with it. I could probably rally a bunch of senior citizens in town to want to do something if I wanted to. So, you know, as our city manager and staff are trying to work with us and balance all these needs, being really smart, data-driven, and conservative in the long run will serve us all really well. And, you know, patience coming out of COVID with us comprehending all these wants and desires that we want. We can't just flip that switch now. We need to arm our staff with the timing as well as the dollars to execute these ideas well. And there's a lot of new faces out there, a lot of fresh perspectives. That's an awesome thing. And thank you for joining this team and being a part of it. And this is a really positive binder sitting in front of us and a very intelligently, smartly, pragmatically developed document. So I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, Mark?
Yeah, just really quick, I would like to highlight page 63 of the budget. It is a chart which is full-time employees per 1,000 population. And for the upcoming budget year, we're 4.44 employees per 1,000 of residents. And back, if you go back 10 years, we were down below 4. That number is low, you know, pretty much, and this is off the top of my head, the only communities that low are like Sterling Heights and Troy and maybe Farmington Hills. And if you want, we could get the other communities' stats, but we are very low numbers of employees to 1,000 population.
Appreciate that, Mark. Edna?
Thanks, Ethan. One thing that hasn't come up in our discussion tonight, we talked about how the millage rate has decreased, mainly because of Headley and Prop A. And most people don't realize that because what they're looking at is perhaps their average residential taxable value, which has gone up, and that is a good thing. We often get comments and feedback from our residents, well, my property values went up, or you know, the region is seeing growth. How is it that we can't have X, Y, or Z? And we can't just look at that average taxable value. You have to combine that with the millage rate. And this is not the first year that Headley and Prop A have taken a bite out of our millage rate. It was 1.6, right, David? Now we're down to 1.22. That's 0.38 of a mill. And that's over the past few years. That's millions of dollars that we are not getting. And will continue to not get. And so while it's a very great thing that property values are increasing, it does not close all of the gaps with our needs versus wants from a budget perspective, because we do have a lot of wants. And so for residents that are looking at the, I don't know how many hundreds of pages this document is, if you're only going to look at a few pages, I would recommend looking at pages 20 through, I'll say 22, because it really puts into context what we're looking at in terms of revenue to the city, because we get our tax bill and we sign it over to the city of Troy. We write our checks or do our payments online. The reality is the city of Troy only sees a fraction. So when you look at page 20 and you see that the, average tax bill is $4,933, know that only $1,382 of those dollars actually go to the city. The vast majority, or on par with what the city gets, is what the school district gets. And then the various other entities within the county or the region get it. So this budget is so well balanced in terms of really appreciating wants versus needs and not going outside the boundaries, knowing that Headley and Prop A will continue to eat away, no matter how well we as a city are positioned from a property value standpoint. So for residents, if you're only going to pick 4 or 5 pages, I would start there and then thumb through the rest of the 300 pages at your leisure.
Makes sense.
As I did over the weekend, and all of us did.
Teresa, anything else? Ellen, you're good? Ian?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Councilmember Hoderick said about how important it is to consider expanding the number of employees that we have in the city, how we've been underemployed, I guess, for lack of a better term, for a long time. I don't know if it's in here and I overlooked it, but it would seem to me that that is the amount of money we're paying for those 18 employees, whether they're moving from part-time to full-time or whole new positions, is a fairly small percentage of this budget. Am I right about that? Do we have an idea of what the percentage is roughly? Are we talking like half a percentage?
Maybe a couple more percentage than that, total FTEs. But what I was going to say, just real quick, if you look at the 5 building inspectors and the planning position, those 6 total, right? We're lowering our contractuals with Safe Built. So it's not actually adding any cost there. The 2 police that you just mentioned, that's being offset by revenue from the mall. So then you take the 3 other positions. Frank's got most of that in contractual right now. Again, so all these positions really are, those 11 aren't adding cost. Then the library is just additional services from the millage that the residents passed. You can back that one out. It really comes down to the 2 HR positions and the one in the manager's office, in my eyes, that are true additions. So you really could say that there's not 18 new positions, there's 3 new positions.
Thank you.
If that helps.
No, that's very illuminating. Thank you.
That would look good on the slide.
It would look really good. And then I also wanted to echo what Councilmember Abraham said about the effect of Headley and Prop A, which not only takes our millage down, but it caps your taxable value on your property. So a lot of us, if we're checking Zillow to see what our property is worth these days, your property taxes are not going up that amazing rate that your, market value is for your property. It's 5% or CPI, whichever's less, correct?
Yep.
So that's why we had that fairly modest increase, if I'm correct, in our revenues, is because, people like us who've been sitting on their property for nearly 2 decades, we're going to see a fairly modest increase in our taxable value, but we're also going to see a slightly less in our millage rate. So it's probably going to even out fairly, we're not likely to see a major increase in the taxes that we're paying this year versus last year. So
When Kelly and I were doing the Headley adjustment for this year, she's like, wow, watching me crying. She's like, I've never seen a grown man cry during work like this, but that's what happens when what Headley does to you.
right. And
Can we break those tapes? Can you find those tapes? I know.
I mean, I seriously, if we could get people to come out and watch it, which I don't know if people would take their time to actually, I would love to be able to have an educational seminar for the public on Headley and Prop A and how much, and state shared revenues and how much all of those things that we have no direct control over, how difficult it makes. And again, echoing what Mayor Baker and other people have said, how grateful we are for the work that goes into making this budget, keeping it, modest improvements, capital is being largely funded by grants. I mean, this is a work of art. So thank you very much to everybody who's put all the time and effort into this.
Dave, you got anything else?
Just to piggyback on that, basically when people ask me how does Prop A and Headley work, I say we do not tax any gain on your property above inflation. It is untaxed, essentially. That's how it effectively functions for us. In fact, we tax you on the lowest inflation-adjusted value of your house since 1994 when Prop A was approved. And that's why we've never really recovered from the Great Recessions. Everyone's property hit a low there, and now we've only increased the inflation adjustment. And so that is a fundamental issue there. Also, if you combine, to go on the other topic we were talking about, if you combine the full-time and part-time hires for this year versus last year, we're only increasing at 1.2, according to the budget.
There's our nerd putting it in layman's terms for all of us. Love it.
Rebecca, do you have anything else? No? All right. Okay. Mark, I'm not sensing a great need for a Wednesday night follow-up. I just want to check with Kelly. I mean, it seems, unless you want to come up with something new for us Wednesday night, I don't see us needing that. So I think you have our permission to cancel it.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Okay. And then today's slides, will those be put online as well?
Yes, they will.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you. And look forward to a public hearing on May 9th. And the follow-up questions or stuff you had, reports and stuff you'll give to us. That concludes the business stated in the special meeting notice. There's no other business this evening, I hope. And then, so we're adjourned.